welcome to American TESOL Presents Free Friday webinars. We're here every Friday and it's free, and you can get a certificate of attendance. If you just go here and you click on the download your certificate. We have over 100 topics, over 100 webinars on different things. You'll find out about the latest in technology. Because I'm one of the leading people in education technology, so I try to find the most recent resources. But you also find very practical things that you can use in your classroom. And today, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about something that's really practical and actually not that difficult to implement, and that's having guest speakers. So here you can see a guest speaker, and what kind of a guest speaker is he? What is his profession? You can type that in the chat box. And you can always bring friends because we're here at this time every Friday. Yes, exactly, Amy. Great job. It is law enforcement. And that's one of the great things about guest speakers, guest experts, is that when you have them come into the class, they can offer different types of experience. But I think it's so important because what it does is it really inspires your students. So those of you who have students that maybe are very hard to motivate, or they're difficult, or during this time when it gets towards the end of the semester, your students will often get restless. And sometimes they need the curriculum shooken up. So we need to do something different. We need to engage them in new ways. And having a guest speaker is an easy way to do this. There's so many advantages to having a guest speaker. One is that its research has shown that when students see people in their community that come from their area, their neighborhood, or even their city, and they see them as professionals, then it makes it real to them. In other words, it's very inspiring. They start to think about those different careers because it's not someone that's in a different country or something like that necessarily. So if you get local ones. Now, if you get people from different countries, that's really good too, because what it does is it shows students how math, science, reading, speaking English applies in different types of careers. So it's very motivating to get your students to think about the future and about pursuing different types of careers. One of my favorite times was when I was in middle school. I was about 11, and my dad used to have us go in the summers to an engineering program. So after I got out of school in the summers, I spent more time in school. But it was fun and I enjoyed it. I appreciate my dad for doing that. But one of the guest speakers, they always had guest speakers, and one of them that they had was an FBI agent. And for a long time, I wanted to be an FBI agent. But it encouraged me to get my master's, because in order to be an FBI agent, you have to have different degrees. So it can be very motivating for your students. The other thing is, sometimes our students, they start to act up because they suffer from something we call mommy deaf. Have you ever heard of mommy deaf? Those of you who are parents will understand the concept of mommy deaf. So what it means is that if you have children, or if you've ever been around children, and if you've told them, clean your room 100 times, it's like they don't hear you anymore. And that's actually, they don't. They have trained themselves to tune you out. They have, our students, children growing up, they tune themselves. Yeah, exactly. We same with husbands. They tune you. When they don't find something that's not pleasing, or they don't want to hear, what they tend to do is they tune it out, and they make their brain train to where they actually won't hear that anymore. So one of the things that happens even when we're teaching and towards the end of the semester is our students get the same kind of notion. They no longer listen to us because they've tuned us out so much. So when we have a guest speaker, it's a way to get them to listen to somebody else. It also gives you a break from the learning. And sometimes as teachers, towards the end of the semester, a lot of us are just burnt out and we're overworked and we're just so frustrated. Even some really great teachers that I talk to right now are very frustrated because their students are just acting up. And so it's a great way to have a nice break, but also continue the learning. The other thing is that it helps your students to see different types of voices and experiences, and it introduces them to different accents. It also introduces them to culture, and when we talk about things like CLIL, if you're working with CLIL, then that's something that they try to reinforce, and that can be very difficult. The other idea behind it is it helps them begin a professional learning network. And some of you are familiar with this. Hi, Leo. Leo's an expert at this. And some of the other of you that are in here are very good at about having PLNs. But what it means is that now our students are connected to those professionals. In other words, that they can decide, hey, I want to continue the learning. So an expert at professional development and professional learning networks. And that's a professional learning network is who we have online or who we get to connect with us and learn from. These are also primary resources. So often, like for example, I love teaching science. Yes, it does. According to me, it does. But for this webinar, personal or professional, they become primary resources. In other words, if you want to teach something historically, or let's say you want to teach a current event, then it would be really fantastic if you could have someone that is interviewed that is experiencing that event. That is often our students, they'll read interviews or they'll listen to interviews on tape, and that's great. But it's more engaging, more motivating, and they can make a real connection if they actually talk to someone who's in that field. So if you're teaching, for example, business English, then talk to different types of people who are in the business field so your students get an idea of that. If you're talking, for example, with high school students, you can do things like, for example, if you're trying to learn about a famous person now, like Tony Hawk, and a lot of times we have celebrities, even David Beckham, you can actually probably get them to talk to your students. And you might say, how is that possible, Shelley? My students would love if David Beckham talked to them. Well, I'm going to show you how. But one of the most rewarding things, as I said before, and NASA is very good at this. You can see NASA, this is an astronaut, and he's helping one of the students build a rocket. The idea is that in like research I was telling before, it's been shown that when students see different types of people, and those especially that tend to not to be in the neighborhoods or be in parts of the world where they don't tend to have that many opportunities, if they see someone that they can in real life that works with them, or even through Skype, we're going to talk about virtual as well, they begin to believe in different possibilities. They start thinking of a different type of future than what they tend to see around them. And I think that's one of the most rewarding parts of having a guest expert. So how do you find guest experts? There's lots of places. One of the first things you can do, and we're going to talk about local before we talk about virtual, or how you can find them online. When I was teaching, one of the places that I trained was a hands-on learning science museum, and we had guest speakers every single week. So my job was to try and find them. And where was I going to find them? Well, I actually discovered it's not that difficult to find people around your area. One of the first things you need to do is take your curriculum and make a quick list of topics and dates so you can hand out. So you can, if you have this already on the computer, this is very easy. If you have your book and that's what you base your curriculum on, just take any of the topics, whether it be restaurant, food, characteristics, whatever it is, and then just put a quick set of like date ranges, March. You can even put like months, and that's fine. And what you want to do with that list, and it shouldn't take you more than 5 minutes to really do this, even if you're writing it down, and you can make copies of it, and you hand it out, and the first people you hand it out to are your students. And then ask your students to brainstorm people they can ask. It could be relatives or friends or cousins or aunts or family friends, or maybe people that they know, like parents of their friends that are maybe not in the class, to brainstorm that they can talk about. So for example, restaurant. Do any of you all know any experts that could talk about restaurants? Or any vocabulary or anything that we would have to do with restaurants? What are some possibilities? You can type that in the chat box of careers or different types of people that might be experts at restaurants. If you have any suggestions, you can write that in the chat box. But the great thing is it begins to have your students make these connections of who around them is an expert. And one of the reasons we do this is because if you just ask parents, not all students will have parents that can contribute. So that's the problem if we only invite parents. But what we can do instead of that, which is a little bit more rewarding and appeals to most of your students, is you give the same list to the parents and you say, hey, would you mind offering your expertise someday? Or do you know anyone who would make a great guest speaker for any of the topics in this list? And the parents are going to appreciate that, because if they don't have the time, usually parents get very upset if they don't have the time and they think, oh no, I don't, now the teacher's going to play favoritism because I won't be able to be there, and so it's a disadvantage to my child. But instead, parents love to offer suggestions. And I bet you that there's always at least one person that parent's going to know. So for example, I gave you restaurant. And Alexandra said you can look for people for local fauna or flora. Yes, exactly, or for history. But one of the things you can do is you can also have people have expertise, like for a restaurant. Maybe you know a food critic. Maybe you know someone who has recently taken one of those sushi courses, or who's currently taking cooking lessons. Maybe you know someone who is a pastry chef. Maybe you know someone who's a baker. Maybe you know a grandparent that has for many years made historical type of recipes that nobody else makes. So maybe you know a restaurant owner, maybe you know a chef, maybe you know, there's so many different types of experts in every single field. And so all of them have something very interesting to share with our students. Now there are also virtual possibilities, and you can see right here, can you identify this gentleman? My PLN, I often invite speakers to speak with my students either through Skype or through Google Hangouts. I often will invite them through blogs as well. So in every type of workshop or something, you usually tend to see that I invite other people in my PLM because they add so much to the conversation. Here is expert Graham Stanley, who recently won an Elton, and I really like that Graham is always very excited. Yes, it is. You can ask him, and this was in Brazil. I was doing a workshop in Brazil, and guess what the topic was that we were talking about when I was training the teachers? Because Graham Stanley recently won an Elton, and his book is actually, I think he has another book up for an Elton this year as well. But he is the expert. Yes, well, yes, gamification or game-based learning. So that's what he spoke to us about. And you see that beautiful blue on his wall? I just like that so much. He always has very interesting things. So where can we find guest speakers virtually? So we can't find any around, and you can. A lot of times if you call the top businesses, they have a lot of companies. They have where they have programs where they're supposed to mentor. So you can get top experts like engineers. You can get, in the past I've had a Lego expert, which happened to be one of my friends, and he just was awesome at building Lego roller coasters. And so he came and he spoke to my students all the time, and he helped them build Lego structures that worked and moved. So it was really cool. Another time we had our meteorologist. We called the weather station a meteorologist, and he was very famous, and we asked him if he would be a guest speaker, and he said yes. So a lot of times you just got to ask, and when you ask, they'll be more than happy to speak to kids or to speak to your students or even university, because every time they make an appearance with students, they can write that up and it looks good for the company. We had water engineers at one time, and what they did was they took our 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds, and they took them to the local river, and they had them collect samples in the water, and then they had them look through microscopes at microorganisms in the water. It was very interesting. We had a dinosaur expert, and they looked for fossils. We've had cave experts. So if you ask, there's so many different opportunities that you can find if you just look around you for guest speakers to come and really engage your students. But one of the easiest ways is also through virtual means. And if you are someone who uses Skype or Google Hangouts, then you can have guest speakers in your class at least once a week. And that can be a very good treat for your learners. And I'm going to show you how you can make sure that all your students are paying attention and actually getting a lot of valuable learning through this. So the first place you want to go, and these are all free resources, by the way, is to education.skype.com/guest_speakers. So pretty easy there. Not too difficult to understand that. So you go there, and when you go there, you can find artists, you can find museum experts. They give you so many suggestions. You can find musicians, all kinds of different types of people. The other one you really want to do as well is Skype with an author. So if, for example, with my students, one of the people that I think is absolutely amazing to be able to have speak to my classes is Julia Donaldson, and she writes the Gruffalo. So for my young learners, she plays the guitar. Her husband also works with her, and it's fantastic. It's really interesting and engaging. But this is one way to get your students really interested in reading. So for example, if you're going to have teens, and a lot of times teens aren't very motivated to read at all, you can often ask the author, will you Skype with us? And a lot of times you can find them here. You can also do something called a mystery Skype. So it doesn't always have to be celebrities or authors or career. We can learn from other students as well in other classes. And they are guest experts as well. And what are they the experts on? They're the experts on their culture. So a lot of times when you're trying to introduce students to a different culture, then one of the things you can do is you can go to Mystery Skype. What is a Mystery Skype? Mystery Skype is a game type of guest speaking experience. So what it is you have two classes and they don't know their locations. They have to find the location by asking each other questions. So your students come up with questions. I'll give you an idea. Here's a fantastic idea that her students, so you can kind of see it in action. They're studying the different types of maps. And when they're asking each other questions, it says something like, is your continent in the Eastern or Western Hemisphere? Do you speak English as a first language? And so they ask all of these different types of questions. They can also give clues. the time is, the season is. So that's what a mystery Skype is. You can also have a mystery Google Hangout, or you can invite guests through Google Hangout. I love Google Hangouts because you can have more than one camera. If you didn't know it already, last week or the week before, Skype came out with breaking news, and now you can have up to 10 on a video, and it's free for everybody. So if you haven't heard that yet, you of course heard it from today, because I keep up with this stuff. I think it's very interesting. But you can have a lot of different types of people come, and they will go, and they will also take part in your Google Hangout. The great thing about a Google Hangout, yes, exactly, Leo, it is 10 on Google Hangout. What I like about Google Hangout is if you want to record it, it is automatically recorded and goes to your YouTube channel. So that's something that is really, I think, better than Skype, because I do like to do all of these recordings. So later on, the students will immediately have access. And as soon as the Google Hangout is finished, it's already accessible. The other great thing about this is anybody with a link, if you give them the link, so parents, if parents want to see from work you live with the guest speaker, which parents are going to want to see, or other students that maybe are sick that day, they can still be a part of the experience, which I think is absolutely amazing. There's so many features within Google Hangouts. I absolutely love it. I think it's one of the best ways. And of course, you can do mystery hangouts as well. It's the same concept, except instead of having the mystery hangout through Skype, you have it through Google+. Now, one of the things that you might say, well, what is going to be a better option? Okay, so this is how you determine. To be on Google+, you should be ideally 13 years old or above. So that's going to be one of your options. If it's private, it doesn't matter. But if you want your students, you don't have to have an account with Skype. It's something that you download, so it's more private. So if your parents are really about privacy issues, then that's something that you want to consider. But I do prefer Google Hangouts. I think if you can do it, I think you really should try it out. The other part that you can do with Google is now they have something called Helpouts. So you can actually find guest speakers if you go to the Helpouts. There's some that charge money, but there's a lot that for 10 or 15 minutes will talk to you on any topic, and it's absolutely free. You can just type in a term, and when you type in a term, it automatically will show you all of these experts that you can choose from. I believe you can even see little videos so you can see who's going to be very motivating for your class. So what can you do with it? Well, the other part that you can do is you can have different types of speakers also come through Twitter. So if I told you could get celebrities, if you ask celebrities if they'll do a Twitter chat, they may not go on video, but they will do a Twitter chat. You just come up with a hashtag, or you could do a Facebook chat. The British Council Teaching English page is wonderful. Every single week they do a Facebook discussion. You can model it off of that. On this one, you can see the example here, they're talking to the Secretary of Education. So the students got to talk to U.S. Secretary of Education, Arnie Duncan, and on Twitter, and they used the hashtag student voice or Stu voice. So you can just come up with a hashtag. I've asked many authors and many different people, even people like Stephen Krashen and David Crystal, and they don't necessarily use their Twitter account a lot, but they will have a Twitter conversation with you when they're able to. So you can even invite top authors and speakers, and they'll come and they'll do it, and they'll do it for free. It's a great platform because then if you get your students to be on different accounts, it's also one way for them to all be busy. Because what's the problem is that a lot of times when we're having these, we don't do them to where everybody can be busy, and then our students and tend to act up, and we're going to talk about how to manage these. But the other part is you can ask your passionate, personal, professional learning network. So if you're on Facebook and you're in many Facebook groups, or if you're on Twitter, if you're on Ning, if you're on LinkedIn, whatever site you're on that you connect with teachers, you know people in your network that could be experts. I've been an expert in many, many, many Skypes or Hangouts, and I talk often, I would say probably at least 50 times a year through those means to be an expert for people, and I love it. I love doing that. So you can ask them, and a lot of times they'll say yes. One of the great examples of this is Sylvia Toledano, and I definitely recommend that you read her blog because she is absolutely amazing. She comes up with some of the best lessons in teaching I've ever seen, actually, and this is one idea. So they were walking outside, and her students, what they did was they went ahead and they found these bones, okay, and they found these, and so they took a picture of them. They found it on the school campus, and then Sylvia, she tweeted it. She's at Languages on Twitter, and what she did, she tweeted the picture to Twitter, and they asked, her students asked people, can you identify what kind of bones these are? And then she got all of these answers, and then she even got connections to, you might see here, they connected them with biologists. She was able to speak also with forensic pathologists, veterinarians, a bone guy. So she had different experts that were able to give their opinions, and the students just found this so interesting. So you can do things like this as well, where you can have more than one expert through something like a back channel like Twitter. You can probably do something, you can invite a guest through Edmodo as well. So if you know people in Edmodo, that's a little bit safer. Just think of your different social networks that you can have a guest expert. So that's me. I'm talking with Emma and her son, Thomas. At the time, Thomas was 6 years old. Now, Emma's a teacher in the UK, but Emma was not my guest expert. Actually, Thomas was my guest expert, and he was my guest expert twice. And this was through Skype. And what happened was that Thomas is an expert at origami. So at the time, I was teaching in Germany, and I'm actually in Germany right there. And I wanted my students to, from Germany, they were learning language. They were 4 to 6 year olds. And so Thomas, what we did was we Skyped with him. I gave them all origami paper, and Thomas gave them directions on how to build an origami box. Now, why did I do that? Well, it's hands-on. So it kept my 4 to 6 year olds from running around, although the last 5 minutes they did run around during the question phase. So there might be that for a little bit. They get restless. So you want short conversation if they have short attention span. But the great part about it was that they loved doing it, and it kept them busy. They were able to learn the language of instructions, and they learned it from a 5-year-old in the UK. So I thought that was amazing. Here's me again, and on this one, I was reading a book on Skype through, for Cyrilino, that's Christina Milos, and so what she did was have me read a pug book, because I love pugs, to her 3rd graders in Romania, and that was a program she was doing with teachers all over the world. Now, one of the tips is for management, get each student to create questions. So it is the student's job before the guest speaker comes to find out a fact about the guest speaker. So you can do that. You can set up like a Padlet, you can set up a Linowit, you can set up, even in your Edmodo group, a blog, wherever it is that you have online. Each student is responsible for finding a fact about the guest speaker. They can Google the guest speaker. They can Google the guest speaker's profession. Anything related to the guest speaker, they have to come up with a fact. And then they also have to come up with a question. So what happens is then they can line up, and each of them can go to the computer. You see the computer here. They can ask the question, and they can even verify the fact with as they go on. And so that's what Christina Milo's students did with me, and it kept them very active, and it kept them busy, and they were very good with the guest speaker that way. So you can also have them revise their questions, so you can do peer editing and all of that beforehand to make sure that the English is correct. You can have them practice saying the questions as well, because when they speak, especially if you have them speak to somebody and they know, you might find this with students a lot, that if they know that that person is, especially if they're native speaker or something, that they want to do a good job. They want to be able to impress that speaker with their English skills. So it's very motivating for them to talk as well. One of the things I recommend so students keep busy is to have them have a back channel. Now, I mentioned Linowit and Padlet, and the reason why I use these tools all the time, I absolutely love them, I will never stop using them, is because, one, you don't have to register for them. Two, it's so super easy to use and to create one of these. Your students can use them in an iPad. They can use them on a cell phone. They can use it anywhere they can access the internet. They can have access to Linowit or Padlet. They don't have to register for accounts, so it's easy. They can post pictures, they can post videos, they can post questions, they can post all kinds of things. And this, I believe, I'm not sure, maybe it was in Brazil, but maybe it was also, Leo, I think you all, when I was in Israel, I think your teachers might have put a Padlet of questions for me. I'm not really sure, to ask me about my background and stuff. I can't. Yes, you did. Okay, so actually, Leo kind of came up with this idea. I knew it was from somewhere. They asked me questions on a Padlet or Linowit. I prefer Linowit because it's more stable. And you can find free apps and everything with them. They can be accessed on any device. But Padlet, what would be the benefit of Padlet that you might want to try it is that it's password protected. So as long as your students know the password, they can get onto it. I tend to leave it unprotected, but they can post different types of questions that when they're doing the interview, their job is to constantly be on there and posting questions. Another thing that you can do is you can give them jobs and roles and responsibilities. And this is something that you can find out a lot about if you go to Pernell Rip's blog. Pernell Rip lists a whole bunch of different types of tasks that your students can do. One of them that is, oh yes, thanks you, Mahmoud. That's true as well. You can have Poplet as well. Poplet's a really good resource for having students go on and create questions. You can have them do different things. So you can't really see it here, but one of them is the answerer. One of them is the tweeter. So if you have a Twitter account or if you have a blog account, someone is the reporter. What they're really doing is they're going and they're having you do, oh, that's a fantastic idea, Leo. Okay, so Leo was telling us for management to have different colors of your sticky notes. So blue is facts that are true, pink facts that are, and then green is for questions. That's a fantastic idea. Okay, so with the Skype, or this is just an idea of different jobs. So you can have someone that greets them. You can have somebody else, a student that has a different role as being the reporter, the class reporter of what questions were asked, how did they answer them. And you can have a few reporters because you want to make sure that everybody is up to par, like they can cross-reference what they wrote, and then they can come up with something good. They can come up with a podcast about it. They can come up with a blog post about it. They can come up with a presentation about it. You can make sure that all your students come up with a presentation, and what they have to do is they have to constantly write down what occurred. You can have something exactly like today's meet as a back channel, and this will keep your students engaged. You may recognize these wonderful people as well. You notice how I have a lot of people from my PLN who I ask to join me often. But don't just have your guests come and offer knowledge. You don't want another lecture. have them do something with your students. There's a million different things that your experts can do with your students. Here is my really good friends, Mike and Chia, and they do puppet shows. They do Oscar, and they come up and they do little puppet shows. So that's very interesting for my students. My students love to see Oscar and all of them talk, and they talk back to them. So it's a great thing for young learners to see. But there are different ways as well. Let's say, for example, you get somebody who's a good cook. You're interviewing a chef. That's a great opportunity to have your students cook along with the chef. They can make something together. They learn what? They learn the language of instructions. They learn the language of this. And we know through TPR, total physical response, if it's hands-on, that your students are more likely to remember it. You can have a magician, and the magician can show them a magic trick. You can do something like you can have them exercise. Maybe they teach them new exercises. Maybe you have your trainer from your gym and you're studying verbs. Let's say you're studying body parts. Then you can have him come, and he can come and show, or her, they can do exercises. I've had that happen in my summer program, and the students loved it. You can have them do games. They can have games that they play with each other, or games that you suggest for your expert. You can have them make crafts. So let's say that you have somebody who's really good at sewing or knitting, or maybe they make art with that artist. Let's say that they have an artist that's good at watercolors. Then you can have a famous watercolorist come, and they can do watercolors. But they're still learning the language, and they're still paying attention, and it's hands-on. You can have them do things like I did with the origami. They actually made the origami. There's a lot of maker movements. So you can find a lot of kids. They can make things like model cars. They can do things like create puzzles. They can do things like create 3D puzzles. They can build forts. They can build for history. You may want to have them build a fort. You may want them to do, maybe they are learning about a house and the different types of furniture. They can build all kinds of different blueprints. Let's say you get someone that's an architect, then they can do blueprints together. So think about what hands-on activity, and it can be 5 minutes. It doesn't have to be that long, that your guest expert can do. And your guest expert's going to really appreciate that too, because that's a fun experience for them. And they will just love that. You can have them learn a song or dance. So a lot of times with young learners, that's something that you want them to do. You can get the whole entire class involved, and each class can teach each other different types of cultural songs and dances. For example, we've had things such as folklorio dancing. I've had Tejano singers. I've had mariachis come and all be presenters. And that I've seen as presenters too. My college professor, when I was taking a Latin studies course, she would have tango dancers. She had dancers from Argentina, and we would study the history of the steps. So it's very interesting. You can have them do demonstrations and experiments, and this is something that I would have my students as well. You can have scientists come, and it's very easy for them to show a demonstration or experiment. It's easy for them to show this on Skype as well, so don't think that they have to be in person. You can get something, you can tweet Neil deGrasse Tyson or Bill Nye the Science Guy, and you can ask them, hey, would you speak to my students in Indonesia? Will you speak to my students and do a demonstration for them? We're learning about this. And you would be surprised, because they'll say yes, especially if you're from around the world. And there are different types of countries that they can speak to children. In those countries, they love it. They love going to different types of countries, even virtually. You can have them do field research, and that's something I was talking about earlier. We actually had someone at one time, we've had storytellers as well, who's told fantastic stories, but we've also had field research. What that means is that we got local scientists, and they came out and they worked with our students to collect samples, something on bugs. They did bug identification. There's many things that they did. you can find all the resources. I know there is tons and tons of resources today, but I always like to share a lot of things because I think it's important, and that way you can see what is appealing for your class. So hopefully you got a lot of different ideas. I'm going to give you the pearl trees of where you can find all of this, so that way you can go and you can start inviting guest speakers and give yourself a break once a week. It's free, but it's also a way to engage your students and really motivate them to be able to look for those jobs that they may not otherwise have known existed, or they, and that's one of the great things is one of your students who comes up afterwards and says, oh, I love this teacher. I think I want to be a meteorologist when I grow up, or something like that. I just think that's really